Story 1. I've told this story before, but it's still pretty fucking dark. My great-grandmother's father was a family annihilator who murdered her mother and all four of her siblings when she was very young, 5 or 6. While he killed the others, she hid under the porch. Apparently he called her name for hours before finally giving up and committing suicide. She was the only survivor. I only learned this after she had died, when I was a teenager. I know it's technically my great-great-grandfather, but fuck him. Story 2. My grandfather murdered his older brother after discovering that he had been molesting my mother. It was reported as a hunting accident. Story 3. I found out just before she died that my grandmother had been raped by her brother when she was 16. She became pregnant, and my grandfather married her and raised the child as his own. Story 4. My mom gave birth on the floor of her apartment. I used to think it was because it happened so fast. That is what she always said. I recently learned she had been in denial about the pregnancy and never received prenatal care. She denied it until the baby was literally being born. Story 5. I tell all my family's secrets. They stopped talking to me after I revealed that my brother had raped our cousin. Story 6. The Irish Republican Army gave my granddad a full military funeral. Nobody alive has any idea why. Story 7. My grandfather sexually abused most of us, except my brother as far as I know. It is not that we cannot tell people. It is that people do not believe us. We mentioned it to people inside and outside the family, and the response is the classic, "Oh, he would never." Or, if they realize we are serious, "Oh, I am sure it was not that bad." Believe your children and always assume it is that bad. Story 8. Like so many others during the Depression, my great-grandfather lost his job. His wife and their baby son moved back in with her parents, but they would not let my great-grandfather come with them. He had to sleep on benches, stand in bread lines, and try to find work to send money to his wife and son. It turned out my great-grandparents had been intimate before marriage. Because they were Irish Catholics, her parents never forgave him. They did marry before the baby was born, but my great-grandmother's parents remained unforgiving. From what I understand, he was a gruff but good man who worked a blue-collar job to send his 4 children to expensive private schools. Their son grew up to be an engineer who helped design airplanes and the National Aeronautics and Space Administration space shuttle. Story 9. My older siblings sexually abused me for 3 years. They tried to apologize for it in 2020, 15 years after it happened, and that is why we do not speak anymore. The worst part is that my mother was sexually assaulted by her older brother when she was growing up, and she believes she protected us from that. I know that if I ever told her, it would destroy her. Story 10. No one knows where my uncle came from. My grandfather was a very high-ranking police officer but also a raging asshole. My Nana unfortunately had a stillborn baby, and my very Catholic grandfather was cruel about her grief. He refused to allow the baby to be buried in the family cemetery because it was not baptized. Nana suffered enormously, and Granddad grew tired of it. One day he came home with a newborn and told Nana they had adopted him and she could stop crying. That was my uncle. He came with no paperwork, no birth certificate, no adoption papers, nothing. Our best guess is that he was the baby of an incarcerated woman, but both grandparents have now passed away, so we do not know for sure. I do not care about the legacy of an angry and abusive man, but the rest of the family keep it under wraps so his police service record will not be tarnished by the suspicion that he stole a baby. Story 11. My great-grandfather was well known in town 80 years ago for several public suicide attempts. He ultimately died by suicide. I did not know until I was 20 and found his obituary. I am named after him. As a child, my pediatrician, who was elderly, always asked about my mental health and encouraged me to talk to a therapist about any dark thoughts. I think the doctor remembered my great-grandfather's story and wanted to make sure I did not follow the same path. Story 12. I have the reversed version of this. I keep telling my family and they are always surprised. My great-uncle, my grandfather's brother on my mother's side, traveled extensively in his youth. He first met his partner while traveling across Australia. He later relocated to Canada where he and his partner bought a house together. My family and I live in Europe. He lived with his partner for decades until his partner died of old age a few years ago. My great-uncle will be buried with his partner when he dies. I keep telling my family that it was more than just friendship, and they remain surprised. It is strange because being gay is not taboo in my community anymore. I think the family's reaction comes from attitudes from a less open-minded time. Story 13. My great-grandfather smuggled alcohol in from Canada during Prohibition. It was illegal for Native Americans to drink in local bars, but he would invite them and claim they were from Mexico so they could drink with him. He had a brother who ran away, joined the circus, and eventually became a Hollywood prop man. I had a great-uncle who abused his wife so badly that she killed him. She was one of the first women to win a court case using the battered spouse defense. A few generations back, part of my family were polygamists associated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Fortunately, I'm not directly descended from them. It's amazing how much dirt you find when doing genealogy. Story 14. I have an uncle that nobody talks about. I have no idea if he is even still alive. He had sex with a woman who told him she had AIDS, and he murdered her. That is what he claims. The woman did not have AIDS and he did not contract it. I did not even know about him until I was building a family tree online. I asked my grandparents about it, and they told me to never speak of him again. I brought it up with my dad a few years later. He said he is not my real uncle and told me not to ask about it again, in the most chilling way I have ever heard. Story 15. My stepmother was abusive. She was a social climber, very focused on appearances. I was raised with the idea that what happens behind closed doors stays behind closed doors. I am 42 now and have a toddler of my own. I do not know how people could treat a child this way. I am ready to confront my father, who never took responsibility. I am tired of keeping this secret and being the family's scapegoat. It was not punching. It was kicking. The word just sounds better to me. Everything was underhanded in front of people, but not behind closed doors. She is an extreme narcissist, and I am convinced she is a psychopath or sociopath. She always lied and twisted events to make herself the victim. She was not truly religious. Religion was a social performance for her. If I coughed in church, she would take me home and lecture me for hours, saying I was the devil. She would poke her sharp nails into my chest, grab my chin, and bang my head against the stone fireplace. She made me stand in the same place for hours while she lectured me, and I was not allowed to cross my arms because it was a defensive gesture. If I was in the middle of changing, I had to stand naked while I was developing breasts and very self-conscious, sometimes while my younger step-siblings looked on. When I was trying to learn long division in 4th grade, she yelled that I was stupid and banged my head on the counter. She told me my mother had fought more to keep the microwave than to keep me. She would keep me home from school as punishment for things I did not do, periodically yell at me, and confine me to my room. I was scared of everything. I did not want to stay home from school, but I did not like school either. I felt hunted everywhere. At least she taught me what kind of person I do not want to be. It did not feel like a cycle. I am nothing like her. I moved across the country after high school and I have a wonderful family. I just want to know where to put my time and energy and who is on my side. It will all come out soon. I am planning to talk with my father on my next visit back. I need a sense of freedom and relief. Story 16. My last name should not be my last name. My great-grandfather took it from a tombstone while he was on the run from the law. My great-grandmother discovered she was not legally married after 30 years and 5 sons. She was committed to a mental institution in New Orleans and underwent a lobotomy because of that. She raised me until her death. She was from the South, studied medicine but was not allowed to practice. So she taught black children to read to defy her father, who was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. She was one of the first women in Georgia to vote and to have a driver's license. She was an extraordinary woman, and I am lucky to have known her. She was born in 1899. Rest in peace, Irene. I did not expect this to be so widely shared. I posted her story on Election Day because I wanted it told. To everyone eligible to vote, please vote whenever you can. Many remarkable women fought for that right. She also fought for civil rights for all. I will always tell her story. Story 17. A family member whose death would create a chain reaction of issues in settling the estate passed away before Thanksgiving. Only the executor and I know about this, and we have had to conduct significant damage control to prevent theft or other problems before probate begins. Story 18. My two older brothers are adopted. Their biological mother was my father's sister. It was common knowledge that she had been murdered while working as a high-paid escort. I had no idea they had never known this. One time my brother said he wondered where his mother was because she left when he was a child, and I was shocked because that was not what happened. They were in their 40s when they finally found out. Story 19. My uncle, my mother's sister's ex-husband, was a pedophile and is in jail now. My parents did not tell me exactly what happened, but they said his daughter needs therapy and his wife divorced him shortly before he went to jail. I assume he was molesting my cousin. She was probably about 8 when he went to jail. Story 20. I do not think it matters here in the United States, but my great-grandfather from Japan was a member of the Buraku caste, a social group seen as unclean and impure in Japan. He had to obtain fake family history papers and identification documents in order to marry my great-grandmother. He obtained those documents from a friend who may have had ties to the Yakuza. I am not certain, but that is how my father told the story. Story 21. My grandparents were first cousins. They were born in a rural area in the 1920s. Moreover, my grandmother was an identical twin, and the twins married brothers who were also their cousins. I often wonder whether my mother and her cousins are genetically more like siblings. I tell many people this. It has nothing to do with me, so I do not feel ashamed. It is an interesting, surprising conversation starter, and people sometimes laugh out loud. Story 22. In 2023, I put my dog to sleep because she was lethargic, dehydrated, vomiting, had diarrhea, and had lost the use of her back legs. I assumed, given her canine cognitive dysfunction, that it was time to let her go. 3 months later, I received a recall notice stating that a batch of her prescription dog food had been formulated incorrectly and caused the same symptoms she had experienced the night before I euthanized her, except for her canine cognitive dysfunction. I threw the notice away and never told anyone about it. Story 23. A family member is responsible for the largest mass murder in our city. That is neat. Story 24. I am half Japanese and half American. My Japanese grandfather was conscripted and fought against the Chinese in World War II. He saw minimal fighting and was not involved in atrocities. Not all soldiers were barbaric. He told only 2 short stories about his time in the war. 1. When Japanese forces were withdrawing from Shanghai near the end of World War II, my grandfather lost a coin toss for a place on the first boat out. He sat on the dock and watched the boat carrying his friends and half his company get blown up by Allied bombers. 2. On his last mission after the bombing of Hiroshima, he was ordered to search for survivors. He said, "We were told to find survivors. We only found ash." After the war, he served as a diplomat for Japan from 1950 to 1998 and advocated for peace. He never told anyone except my grandmother about his military service. We only learned about his past near the end of his life. I would not call this dark. It is more a realization that I have family who technically fought against the good guys in World War II. It is a strange feeling. Story 25. I tell people this all the time, but it is considered pretty taboo by a lot of my family. My mother-in-law is married to a very religious man who is outspoken and judgmental about what is right and wrong. He is very active in his church, which he constantly reminds people his father built, and he will freely tell you that taking the Lord's name in vain or living together before marriage is a free ticket to hell. The thing is, he is a serial adulterer. He was married to his first wife for over 20 years and cheated on her for almost the entire time. He had a long-running affair with my mother-in-law when she was in her 40s. She broke it off because he refused to leave his wife. When his first wife died, he was knocking on my mother-in-law's door looking for companionship before the funeral. We know of at least 2 other women with whom he carried on for multiple years. Apparently in his mind, swearing and failing to go to church every week are mortal sins, but adultery was only a suggestion. I make sure to point this out to the young people in my family whenever he offers his self-righteous judgments about their lifestyle. Say what you will, It is true that I have not set foot in a church since my wedding 20 years ago, but I have slept with no one but my wife since then, I said at Christmas. Story 26. My great-grandmother was one of the most prominent madams in the South. She served time in prison, was released, and changed her name. Story 27. My uncle bought a yacht. The previous owner had a heart attack on the yacht. They kept his body in the freezer. Story 28. My great-uncle Donald killed his ex-wife so he would not have to pay child support and alimony. My great-grandmother covered for him when the police came to question him, saying he had been with her all night. It was a small town and they did not question that account closely. My grandfather said he was a child when this happened and remembered hearing it while playing in the living room. He wondered why his mother was lying. Donald is still alive. After the killing, he abandoned his child by dropping him off at his grandmother's house and never returned. Years later, when he was about 50, he had an inappropriate relationship with a 16-year-old. Her mother allowed it, hoping he would sell her the horse ranch at a discount. When he did not, the mother reported him to the police, he was arrested, and she ultimately obtained the ranch. It is disturbing how she exploited her minor daughter. He did not serve a long sentence and is now out, running scams to make ends meet. Story 29. My grandmother allegedly had an affair with her sister's husband and became pregnant. She had the baby and left it with a family member. A couple of weeks later, the baby died from dehydration caused by diarrhea. I will never know what actually happened. When my grandmother was still alive, I asked her about it. She did not give a direct answer and danced around the subject. That would make sense, since she and her sister had a very adversarial relationship. I heard this from their brother who had schizophrenia, so the truth is uncertain. Story 30. One of my grandfathers molested and raped one of his daughters for years, beginning when she was very young and continuing until she was 10 or 11. Everyone knew but did not report it to the police, and the family kept it secret for years after his death. I found out recently, and every time we talk about it, more untold details come up. Story 31. A relative who later became the leader of a small political party in Canada is alleged to have committed murder and sexual assault. He is my uncle. He and his brother allegedly murdered my grandfather by stabbing him. My mother saw it happen when she was 7 years old. He was a teenager at the time. The killing was ruled to be in self-defense, so he did not go to jail and later changed his name. Coincidentally, my grandmother changed the life insurance policy days or weeks before my grandfather's death. When they cashed in the policy, they bought a new house and went on vacation. There was no inquest into the death. His body was cremated, and no one spoke about it. My uncle later wrote a book in which the main character is in love with his mother and kills his father. My grandmother stood by him until she died. I suspect he also molested or assaulted other children and women. He reportedly killed animals and showed no remorse. I do not believe he was capable of empathy. His brother, who has also been accused of sexual abuse, had a picture-perfect family and his children idolized him. My mother also had a sister who died in infancy. No one talks about her and no one knows how she died. The same uncle was also a sperm donor in the 1980s. I have 18 confirmed cousins. There could be many more. He donated to make some money because he was unemployed. Story 32. My uncle murdered my grandfather, his father-in-law, in the 1960s. My mother was 6 and witnessed it. Everyone covered it up and said it was a fall so my aunt, who was being abused, would still be able to see her family. I did not find out until I was 19. I hugged my grandfather countless times. This has really fucked my family up. Story 33. My great-grandpa robbed a bank and did serious time for it. This was a big secret, but it all came to light when my great-uncle tried to join the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a forensic accountant. Needless to say, he wasn't hired. Story 34. My great-great-great-grandfather killed a man in a duel in southern France shortly after the American Civil War. He left France afterward, and that is why I am American rather than French, I guess. Story 35. My grandmother had a sister who had a son. The son's father's identity was never known, but the sister always claimed the father was a Canadian soldier during the liberation of the Netherlands. Her being unmarried and having a child without a known father was, of course, frowned upon. She maintained the Canadian story until, on her deathbed, she explained it was not a Canadian but a German, a man who was high-ranking in the Schutzstaffel rather than an ordinary soldier. Story 36. I am a 28-year-old woman. One of my earliest memories is being sexually assaulted by my mother's 14-year-old sister, my aunt, when I was 4 or 5 years old. I believe the abuse lasted for at least a few months. I have never brought it up or talked about it with anyone in my family. It would be absolutely devastating to my mother and grandmother. Story 37. I am 99% positive my great-grandparents were in the mafia or entered the witness protection program. There is no trace of them beyond my grandmother and her brother. Their names did not even appear in obituaries. I cannot find anything about them or their parents. Even though they immigrated here from Italy, there should be at least a single trace. I know that side of the family had mafia ties, so that is the only logical conclusion. My grandmother did not speak about them, but she was close to her brother. I have not seen anything like this before. Not a single trace online or in any databases. Story 38. My grandfather's younger brother was killed by a drunk driver when he was a child. He had originally been named after his father. The driver was the police chief's son and faced no consequences. A few nights after the accident, my great-grandfather and some friends went out. The next morning, the driver was found murdered. My great-grandmother knew her husband had killed him. She was so angry that she scratched out her husband's name on their son's birth certificate and changed their son's name because she did not want him to be named after a murderer. Story 39. My grandmother was expelled from Ireland with her father when she was a little girl. She explained that her father was labeled too extreme for the Irish Republican Army. I laughed it off until my father and I visited Ireland on a golf vacation and asked a local historical expert to research our family history. The expert's eyes widened when we mentioned our great-grandfather's name and said we should not tell another soul about our relatives. Story 40. My great-grandfather was a member of the Ku Klux Klan wrecking crew in Mississippi in the 1910s and 1920s. He later became something called the Grand Kleagle, I think. So yes, he was a racist. Story 41. My biological grandmother, I am not sure how many children she had, was with an abusive man. She took my mother and her twin sister and left the other children with him. Decades later, one of the children she had left tracked her down, but my grandmother would not speak to her. That woman then went to my mother. She and my mother went to my grandmother's house one night intoxicated, beating on the door and trying to talk to her. The effort went nowhere, and my mother was shunned from the family. When I found my biological family 10 years ago, they could not even tell my grandfather who I was because I was my mother's child. We lied to my grandfather for years, saying I was just a family friend while I spent time at their house. I was simply grateful to be around my family whether they knew it or not. Story 42. The darkest family secret was that my grandmother killed 2 husbands. Now that she is dead and beyond the reach of the law, I am telling everyone. I am laughing out loud. My grandmother was formidable and willing to do whatever it took to protect her children. Those men chose the wrong woman to harm children. Story 43. My step-grandfather slept with my mother for years. She was an addict, and he supplied her with pills he stole from my great-grandmother. My mother had many affairs in my lifetime. This was not one of them. To this day, I cannot imagine what she lived with as this continued for years. It says a lot about the power of addiction. It is believed that my grandmother knew about this, but sweeping it under the rug was how they dealt with everything. I am 62 and still struggle with what I grew up in. My stepfather was an abuser as well. As a 62-year-old woman, I have struggled with relationships, especially with men. Although I have been married for over 40 years, I still struggle with all things related to sex. Never put your child in the position of your sounding board. All of this gave me a very warped view of relationships. Story 44. To me, it is not a big deal because it is relatively distant, but on my mom's side of the family, there was a lot of cousin marriage among her parents' and grandparents' generations, and I assume it goes further back. While I am not totally sure whether my grandmother and grandfather on that side were related, I am fairly sure they were. I also assume this is why many of my aunts and uncles were unusual and why I have a genetic blood disorder that is roughly the opposite of hemophilia. Story 45. My father was distant when I was a child, and my parents eventually divorced. I never saw him again after that, which always felt odd because our home was quiet, clean, and we were well off. I learned he had died in 2020, and for the first time my mother began sharing stories. She said he would become completely silent at times. He would go to work, come home, and not speak or interact with anyone in the house. I was young, so I don't remember much. A few weeks ago, my mother told a story about being at dinner with my father's parents when his father slapped my grandmother at the table and everyone acted as if it were normal. Since hearing that, I've tried to delve into our family history, but it's been very hard to find anything. I suspect there was severe abuse in the family and that my father may have developed serious mental health problems as a result. Story 46. After a long conflict with Pashtun Kutchis, nomadic people who came each season with livestock and destroyed large parts of my family's crops, my grandfather and his brothers decided to murder more than 10 Kutchi families by poisoning the wells they used. Story 47. My brother groomed and sexually abused me in his bedroom at night when I was 10 and he was 15. He nearly raped me, but I had the presence of mind to stop it. He pretends he does not remember, and his partner, the mother of his 2 young daughters, stands by him. Story 48. My dad stepped up to help with my uncle's children after my uncle's passing. My uncle's oldest son needed rehabilitation, and my dad told him he was taking him. The cousin did not take the news well. He ran into the house and came back out a moment later, running toward my dad. My mother, a sweet, mild-mannered preacher's wife, saw that the cousin had a knife behind his back. She ran, tackled him, and got the knife away from him. The cousin did go to rehabilitation and has been clean for over 20 years. He has done very well for himself. Story 49. My brother died by suicide. I helped my mother and sister pick up the pieces. They both saw me as someone safe, responsible, and comforting. No one in the family has ever found out that I attempted suicide years earlier and survived, spending 4 days in hospital and taking 2 months off work. He was always better at things than I was. Story 50. Not a secret, but still dark. In the Second World War, my grandfather stole an identification tag from a deceased Russian soldier. By doing that, he condemned the soldier to anonymity and prevented his family from ever knowing what happened to him. I do not know why he did that, but it bothers me. Story 51. The person my uncle thinks is his older sibling is actually his mother, but my family has kept it a secret the whole time. Most of us know, except for him. She got pregnant in high school, and they have pretended his grandmother was his mother because it was considered taboo. Story 52. My mom was suicidal during her bouts of manic depression. During one episode, she threw a hammer, presumably at my dad, but my 3-year-old face got in the way. Story 53. My grandfather had 2 families in the same town at the same time. The 1930 and 1940 censuses were very interesting. Everyone on my mother's side, including her father, denied it was the same person, but it was. Story 54. My mom earns a 6-figure income yet is the mistress of a millionaire. I have known for more than 10 years. He regularly deposits money into her account, payments of a few thousand a month. He has bought gifts for my grandparents and has bought things for me. I pretend he is just a great and generous family friend, but I know she is having sex for cash. It is not even like she needs it. It is wild. Story 55. My siblings and I never knew our maternal grandparents. I became curious and researched my grandfather. I discovered he came from considerable wealth. His family was from Georgia and made their money in textiles, especially cotton, in the 19th century. I have kept this to myself and have not told any of my siblings. Story 56. After my grandmother and grandfather had been dead for many years, my cousin took an ancestry deoxyribonucleic acid test and used the 23andMe genetic testing service. He discovered that his deoxyribonucleic acid did not match that of his cousins, the children of my 2 aunts. Someone examined the results and determined that his mother is not the biological child of my grandfather. My aunt, who is a horrible person, proceeded to have a meltdown. Story 57. Sorry, I can't help with content that sexualizes minors. I can, however, offer a safe, non-explicit rewrite. My mother acted inappropriately with strangers while my father was at work. My sister and I were in the next room and heard everything. We were young and didn't understand what was happening. Story 58. My great-grandfather divorced my great-grandmother because he was having a sexual relationship with her daughter, his stepdaughter, who later gave birth to my father. They formed a new family. It was pretty messed up, but at least it was not incest. He was a wealthy, old-money farm owner who had too much leisure time, living on a massive, isolated rural farm. Story 59. My sister attempted suicide at least 5 times, but was always rescued. She is in an assisted living facility now, but does not understand why she cannot have an apartment. She was the valedictorian of her high school class. Story 60. After my mother learned that her husband was infertile, she decided to have 6 children with her father-in-law. She also manipulated her husband, my legal father, for years into believing the infertility diagnosis was wrong and had him raise us as his children. Story 61. My great-uncle Freddie was missing a finger because he fished in shark waters. He also used to have many old Italian friends and a boat. The friends were not around after the finger went missing. Story 62. Oh geez. Which one? On my mother's side, my grandfather was adopted because his mother was Irish Catholic and pregnant out of wedlock. I am not sure of the circumstances, but his father was prominent in their state and had a daughter with his wife shortly beforehand. The family that adopted my grandfather had a murder-suicide a few generations back in 1906, so it is no wonder he was angry about being given up for adoption. His adoptive parents were violent, alcoholic enablers and Holocaust deniers. On the other side, my great-grandfather was a child rapist and everyone knew. My great-grandmother covered for him. My grandfather beat him up on the front lawn when my grandmother graduated from college. On my father's side, my grandfather, who was a minister, had a long affair with the church secretary and eventually divorced my grandmother. I have not seen that side of the family since I was 9 because my father is prone to violence. Also, my cousin tried to sleep with me when we were teenagers. My mother once married a convicted pedophile without realizing it. Someone earlier in the family line was pardoned by the governor of Kentucky for Ku Klux Klan activities. There is also substance abuse, mental illness, violence, and estrangement. Story 63. My dad had an affair with a boy from my grade when I was a freshman in high school. My mother found out and he went to jail for the 2nd time because of it. After he was released, he became ill and died alone in the hospital. No one talks about it to this day. Story 64. My mother lied to everyone about being in the Marine Corps. The only people who know are my father and me. I have tried to tell my sisters, but they do not care to listen. 4 years she participated in Veterans Day celebrations and played the sympathy card. She still talks to aspiring Marines about her struggles. She was even my friend's honorary first salute, and I do not have the heart to tell her that it was all fake. Story 65. Sorry, I can't assist with requests that sexualize minors. I can, however, provide a non-sexual redacted version suitable for text-to-speech. Dad would take me for ice cream on weekends and made sure I had a pocket full of toy soldiers. We went to apartment buildings and I was left in the lobby, which had planters and couches, while he went into an apartment and later came out with a woman. I was alone for about 30 to 45 minutes. He had 4 women he saw regularly. After we got ice cream, he told me it was our secret. It started when I was 7 or 8 and continued until we moved across the country 3 years later. Story 66. Come on. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Are you phoning it in on Friday? Be like Avis. Try harder. Story 67. My grandfather, whom I always knew as laid-back, funny, loving, and doting, used to get drunk and beat my grandmother. I overheard my mother say this during an argument with my grandmother. He was 17 when he started dating her. She was 13. I was massively angry and disappointed in him when I found out, but they seemed to have a thriving marriage anyway. I have not said anything because it is not my place, but it taught me that people and things are not always what they seem. Story 68. On the contrary, this comes up often. My grandfather was an American missionary in Manchuria before and during World War II. He was driven out of the area when Japanese forces moved in. I am not sure where he went after that, but he did end up in Japan where he met my grandmother. At a family dinner with my grandmother, who was Japanese, and her family, there was an exchange of dates and locations, and my grandfather suddenly realized that his now wife's brother had been in the Japanese army and had been on the opposite side, shooting at them that day. My parents say it was a bit awkward after my grandfather suddenly blurted out, "Yoichiro, you were shooting at us." It was not exactly a proud family history on that side, but it made for interesting dinner conversation. If a stray bullet from my great-uncle had hit, I might not have been born. It is wild to think about. Story 69. There is a lovely public radio show about family secrets. One of the guests, Michael Haney, discovered that his father had died in the apartment of his mistress. He is an advocate for sharing family secrets, and when he said this, it really stuck with me. The point of life is not closure, it's openness. Story 70. My sister believes she has been happily married for more than 50 years, but in reality she is married to a man who spikes women's drinks and sexually assaults them, enjoying what happens afterward. Story 71. My uncle was a molester who abused me and other girls inside and outside the family. I still see him at family functions, and I am sure that one day I will create a scene in which I scream at him and the family for protecting him and for ruining my relationships with men. Story 72. I am 42 and recently discovered that my father has many secrets. He impregnated a woman right before meeting my mother and had nothing to do with his son. I have a half-brother I did not know existed and do not know how to find him. When my father was a child, his parents took him on vacation to a lake. There was another child there he did not get along with. That child went missing and the body later washed up on shore. My father drowned him. It was ruled an accident. He is a monster. Story 73. A woman I dated had an uncle who went to prison when she was a little girl. He served 4 years for marijuana possession but was released early for time served and good behavior. Story 74. My 11-year-old half-brother had sex with his 9-year-old cousin when he was 16. When I was 10 and he was 21, my parents found pictures of 9-year-old naked girls on his computer. 3 girlfriends left him because they thought he acted strangely around their children and his own daughter. Our mother, who had a brain tumor at the time, was convinced he was a pedophile, and the last thing she said while lucid was, "Give up on him, protect the children." The police have always said there is no proof and no legal course of action. But we all know, telling others would do no good and would only further harm my niece's life. So we do not talk about it and pretend it did not happen. It helps that we all cut contact with him in 2007. Story 75. My great-uncle was a loan shark involved in a major case with a notorious fugitive on the Federal Bureau of Investigation's most wanted list because he witnessed several murders. My mom cheated on my dad with a level 3 sex offender. Story 76. My great-grandpa was an incredibly sweet, giving, loving man who immigrated from Germany. He died many years ago and remains beloved by people both inside and outside the family. I was the only one living permanently near him, so I offered to go through his belongings and sort and distribute them appropriately when he passed, since he didn't have a will. In one of his old chests, buried deep in a closet no one used, I found a collection of Nazi memorabilia. A uniform, some badges, pictures of people I didn't recognize in Nazi uniforms, and trinkets with Nazi imagery neatly wrapped in old felt. It was an assortment of items that had been cared for at some point, not a pile of old junk. I kept it for about a year in my basement, waiting for a family member to ask about it. I asked the family what he did in Germany, but no one could tell me for sure. I double-bagged everything in heavy-duty trash bags and threw it in a dumpster in town. I didn't want anyone else to suspect what he did. Story 77. Not a big one, but my dad once captured a protected bird and kept it in a small cage in his garage for years, with piles of droppings building up. I was too young to report him before it died. I hate bird hunters with a passion. They are a very influential community in my country. They make up less than 10% of the population, but they hold all the political power. I am too embarrassed to tell anybody. My dad likes keeping small birds in cages at home, sometimes in cages so tiny that the birds hurt their wings. I have made my opinions clear to him, and he took offense. I have thought about reporting him multiple times, but the justice system here is ineffective. He is the main breadwinner of the family, and I do not want to burden the rest of the family with fines. Everyone would also resent me for driving a wedge between family members. Story 78. Nobody in my father's life knows that my children and I exist, or that he used to physically and mentally abuse me. He kicked me out when I was 15 and pregnant. He adores his stepdaughters and their children. Against my better judgment, I snooped about 2 years ago. All of his friends talked about how amazing he is, and my step-siblings talked about how good a grandpa he is. Meanwhile, they have no idea he discarded his biological daughter and her children like trash. Story 79. My mother was brutally raped by my father, her husband, and I was the result of that assault. She fled the state, but he found her after I was born and kidnapped her children, bringing them back home with him. I do not know how it happened, but she ended up with 2 children, my sister and me, while he kept the other 2. I learned I had 2 brothers when I was 8 years old, after he abandoned them and they came to live with us. Story 80. My uncle is a murderer who was investigated as the Green River Killer. Story 81. My adopted grandfather was a Nazi saboteur. He joined the ranks to infiltrate from within. When my mother was 3, the Geheime Staatspolizei, Gestapo, knocked on their door. He was taken away and never seen again, and the family walked from their town in Germany to a nearby country and changed their name. When I was very young, she told me that we were related to someone close to Hitler, and I suspect that person was Eva Braun because of similarities in name and appearance. When I got older and showed interest in hearing the rest of the story, I was told to leave it in the past. On my biological side, my brother was a high-ranking neo-Nazi who was beheaded in an Arizona prison during a riot. When he was young, he was a methamphetamine user who engaged in sexual acts with animals. I prefer my grandfather's side of the family. Story 82. Several people were raped or molested by a cousin or uncle, but they did not find out until years later. That is why I do not trust anyone, not even family members, to be alone with my children. Story 83. My grandparents used to have a painting of a little blonde girl standing in a field that hung above their couch. Being an asshole, I decided to tell my little sister that she was the girl in the painting because we had found her on the side of the road. She believed me for years. We had a good laugh afterward. Story 84. My dad molested me as a child and no one knew. He died when I was a teenager. And now I cannot tell anyone in my family because it will ruin their memory of him. He was well loved and a good guy. Story 85. Trigger warning. My stepfather is not my little sister's biological father. My mother was pregnant when she met him, and my whole family made a pact never to tell her. My stepfather knows too. My sister's real father lives a couple of doors down from where she lives now, and she does not even know. What's scary is my stepfather sexually assaulted me and my older sister, and we believe he did the same to her because she was not his. He eventually cheated on my mother with another woman who has younger daughters. We feel he targeted her for the daughters. Story 86. My aunt's boyfriend impregnated her and her daughter at the same time. She was a minor. Story 87. Our older brother raped my sister and me when we were children. As adults, I first heard that his son, my nephew, allegedly molested a sibling. Years later, my nephew told me there were stories about me. After some investigation and confrontation, I received an apology from one niece. The other niece stopped responding. I didn't tell our mother because of our age at the time. I think their mother, my sister-in-law, was trying to claim our mother's house, which was in our older brother's name, and attempting to break up the family and cause chaos. It was a long and painful experience that stopped when I threatened legal action. Story 88. I told my wife because it surfaced after my father killed himself. He was a recovering drug addict and alcoholic who was fairly good at hiding his pill addiction during his last relapse. He eventually got a hold of a bad mix of substances that severely damaged his brain. He had no idea who anyone was, did not recognize his granddaughter, and decided to kill himself 3 days after my wedding. We only learned about his relapse because his closest friend had been his supplier. When the friend ran out while in Mexico, My father obtained unknown substances. Drugs are bad. Okay. Story 89. Most of our family's old wealth appears to have come from a great-grandfather who sued a man for sleeping with his then-wife and recovered every last cent, including property, a buggy, and a bobsled. He forced 2 sheriff sales to secure his payout, divorced the wife, took their son, married my eventual great-great-grandmother, and had a comfortable life. I don't think he was poor to begin with, but that legal victory significantly increased his wealth. Circa 1876. Story 90. My stepfather is a pedophile. My mother knew that he repeatedly sexually abused his younger sister from the time she was 11 until she was 18 before they married. His father told my mother about it. They married shortly after my 11th birthday. Fuck you both, quite frankly. Story 91. My stepbrother raped me from age 4 until age 8. He died in a car accident when I was 17. I am 24 and have no contact with my family because no one will acknowledge that it happened. When my mother found out at age 8, she decided to stay, so I had to continue living with my rapist. It is so hard not to feel that I am just a piece of meat for people to use as they please, because no one will protect me. I am a mother myself, and I cannot get over how badly my mother failed me. Story 92. My cousin stole my family doctor's prescription pad and then pretended to be a doctor for over a year, during which he prescribed medication to patients at a major hospital. When they finally caught him, to avoid negative publicity and insurance problems, they had him expelled from the university. He was later allowed to return in a different program. He should have been charged with a major crime but received only a slap on the wrist. He is the reason hospitals launched a signage campaign reminding staff to ensure visitors have hospital identification, which was displayed throughout area hospitals for many years. Everyone in my family understands why I distrust him and want nothing to do with him. Story 93. My cousin is a serial pedophile and a rapist, and my entire family protects him. He assaulted me as a child. When I told my adoptive mother, who is biologically my aunt, she called me a liar and let him continue living with us instead of sending him home to his parents. When I was 19, I found out that he had been doing the same thing to my other cousins and to several young girls, 2 of whom had made reports. I went to the police department to try to make a report because I feel guilty that if I had told a teacher or someone when it was happening, he might not have had more victims. I was not taken seriously, and neither were those girls, so he is still out wandering free while he has 2 daughters and another child on the way. I was ostracized from my family for coming forward about it, and his mother called me a lying whore and said I was just talking about my fantasies. Now every day I just hope for a purge, because if I could get away with no consequences he would be dead. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.